Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I have no idea why my voice is sounding funny, but we're not concerned with this today. We're concerned to talk about INFJs and religion. Now, before I move on to this topic, which I hope will be of interest to you, I just want to remind you that I have written a new book, The Infinite Castle. Now, I have not received the physical copy yet because there's issues. I live in Ireland and I have to order the book on Amazon UK, and apparently there's Brexit related issues, so hopefully I'll receive it soon. But in the meantime, this is what it would look like on a tablet or on an iPad. So that's the cover, The Infinite Castle. Okay, I have a few more photos to show you. There's this one that's quite nice as well. Shows you a mock-up of what the book would look like in physical copy. Okay, look at this, look at these beautiful vibrant colors. And there's even the last one that I would like to show you, which is the different sides. And again, you get to have a really cool overview. So you see the sort of multiple infinite towers, the Infinite Castle is title, the logo is reproduced here, which is kind of nice. On the edge, you have, oops, I think I might have turned this off. Let me see if I can turn it back on. Yes. Back cover. All the links are available in the description box below if you are curious to have a look at this. Once again, just to show you the Infinite Castle. It's now the way I would describe this book is probably to say that the Infinite Castle is a blend of existentialism, or sometimes what I like to call post-existentialism, Kafka, Murakami, and Dostoevsky. So whereas my previous work was more influenced by Kafka and Dostoevsky, I think there's more Murakami, and hopefully there's also an original touch in it. So when I make the presentation of the book, when I have it in physical copy, I will talk a bit more about what is in it, what it contains. But let me just tell you that this is an exploration of, this could really be read as an exploration of INFJ consciousness, maybe what you could even call unhealthy INFJ consciousness from the point of view of fiction and the first-person narrator. So if you're curious to look more into this and to help me, because this is another way in which you can support my channel, I would be very grateful. And I will be returning to more INFJ topics, I think, in the next couple of weeks and months. You can get a purchase ebook or pickback version less than $10. As always, a rule that I have set for myself. And it's further expression. Again, it's a story and a novel all by itself, and it's over 250 pages. So it's a proper novel, but it is also something that can very much be read as a further fictional exploration of INFJ consciousness. Like I said, I was fascinated to explore the sort of unhealthier side, and also what empathy and what creativity still exists within, and striving after love and the destiny and future relationship to time that can still exist when we are stuck inside the Infinite Castle, which is a metaphor for something that you'll have to read the book. Some other influences that may surprise you are reality TV, anime. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the character CC. Oh, I can't even remember the name of that show now, but it's a female character from a great futuristic show, female character. So there's some manga influences and plenty of other influences. Some influences Ireland, but the main character is not me, just in case you were wondering, because sometimes people wonder. The main character is not me, but certainly influenced by some of my experiences. Okay, now there's quite a lengthy introduction. Don't forget, you can also get the Ecstatic Soul, another book. The reference of on the INFJ consciousness, not in a fictional sense, but in a non-fictional sense. Over 1,000 copies sold, 4.4 on Amazon, I guess less than $10. The link also available below. Now, so that's kind of a long introduction, to be fair. But let's move on to our topic, right? I'll set up like little chapters, at least 2 chapters or maybe 3 chapters, so that if you're getting dreadfully bored by this lengthy introduction and attempt at kind of promoting my work and surviving, you can skip. So INFJs and religion, you know, some thoughts I had in relation to INFJs and religion. What I find interesting, the more I look into the topic of religion, because for a number of different reasons, I've been more interested in this topic than ever, probably, is that there seems to be a clear difference between how different types articulate their different visions and justifications of religious beliefs. So, of course, you could say that one stance toward religion is going to be either a stance, well, there's obviously multiplicity of different possible stances. One stance is, of course, a stance of agnosticism, of indifference. Agnosticism and indifference are different, actually, so. But indifference is one possibility, agnosticism is another, atheism is another. You can have INFJ atheists, of course. And then you can have theists, people who are actually religious or who identify at least with some form of spirituality. And so I'm making this video talking about religion, but really I think that the argument or the descriptions I'm providing in this video could be extended and applied to, you know, to broader cases that include all forms of spirituality, matters of the spirits rather than purely matters of what you could call matter, the flesh or the body, or science, maybe the physical stuff, physical matter. It seems to me that intellectual types, and the INFJ is likely to be an intellectual type, I think that this is a fair assumption to make, are probably going to be more likely to be preoccupied with the question of justification. And the question of justification is something that we could more or less describe or translate as, how do I justify my faith in the absence of physical evidence, in the presence of incredulity of a broad number of people nowadays? And how do I justify my faith, maybe above everything else, to myself? It's often described by people who are quite religious and quite faithful that faith is also never more authentic and never more powerful than when it is constantly questioning itself. In some sense, faith exists always in a dialectical relationship with doubt, and it is never stronger than when it has been able to overcome doubt, rather than never ever allowing doubt to enter the picture, right? Because in this case, if doubt that never enters the picture, we might worry that the believer is simply just accepting received tradition without questioning it, and doing this almost either as an instinct or as a matter of habit inculcated to them as part of their education or their upbringing, usually if they have religious parents, for example. So we'll start from this premise that the INFJ is likely to be an intellectual type, and insofar as the INFJ is likely to be an intellectual type, they're likely to be preoccupied with the question of justification to the world, people, or just the world in general, and maybe even more so to themselves. And that is going to be the case of all intellectual types, and among these types we might include ENTPs, INTPs, you know, most of the N types, a lot of S types as well. But again, if we talk in terms of likelihood, we'll be inclined to say that the more N, the more likely to be intellectual, the more likely to be preoccupied with justification. But the more I engage with religious texts, and the more I encounter the question of justification, the question of explanation, the more it really strikes me that you can really learn a lot about people's types, theologians' types, religious people's types, by just looking at how they deal with this question of justification. Because one thing that strikes me very much is the fact that TI dominance and T dominance have a very recognizable approach, and FE dominance as well. Although in the case of FE dominance, it's a bit more complicated. So if I were to summarize the point of view of the TI dominant, and a great example for this is, there's two great examples that I can think of. First of all, there's St. Thomas Aquinas on the part of Christianity, Catholicism, right? And Imam al-Razali on when it comes to Islam. Okay, so the Christian God on one hand, the Muslim God on the other. Now these two great theologians are almost certainly TI dominant, almost certainly INTPs, in fact, because they show a fair bit of SI in their books as well. They will go to prodigious lengths to provide rational arguments for the teachings of, on one hand, the Bible, on the other hand, the Quran, and next to that, for all the different systems of belief that are associated either with the Christian religion and the Muslim religion, which, as you probably know, as both Abrahamic religions, in fact, have probably more in common than they have not in common, but sometimes this fact is obscured by contemporary events and political agendas and national agendas and so on. But these thinkers are so preoccupied with constructing this rational, systematic line of arguments to prove that, for example, the world, God is eternal, that God is infinite, that the world has a beginning in time, that the divine substance is not the same as the substance of the world. All these different aspects are almost turned into what you could call like a proof, a system of proofs in written language, not using mathematics, but in written language. But you could imagine that they would be quite close to using mathematics, and I would not be surprised. In fact, I highly, highly suspect that there are TI dominant theologians that have gone so far as to use mathematics and mathematical notation to prove the existence of God, to elaborate and to delineate the rational framework that vindicates a particular religion. But in the case of NI dominance, and I'm thinking here specifically of INFJs, what you'll notice is that the interest is very rarely on justifications via this system of rational argumentation. And this is not because INFJs are incapable of providing rational justification. And my argument would be that because those mechanisms of justification tend to be quite reliant on TI, the INFJ having tertiary TI, even if the TI is proficient, the energetic toll, which is a concept that I'm borrowing from cognitive typology, would be higher. In other words, that it would take more libidinal energy to actually deploy TI usage for long periods of time. That's not something that the INFJ typically likes. A good example of this is if you take INFJ, or highly suspected to be INFJ, Ludwig Wittgenstein, like highly abstract and mathematized books that he's written, especially the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, Tractatus, written in very tight, short, aphoristic language, only 75 pages long. I think that this book is kind of almost gives you a sense of how an INFJ would approach heavy TI usage. It's never going to be these enormous, voluminous works of rational defense that you see in Aquinas, like Summa Theologia is probably about 3,000 pages long. In the case of al-Razali, it's a bit shorter, but there's lots of different books. So it's, and again, it's very, very dense reading, very, very difficult, dense and difficult. Rational, logical, does not try to fool you. This is not charlatan's work by any stretch of the imagination, but very, very dense rational argumentation. INFJ is, in fact, even in Wittgenstein himself, who probably would have identified as an agnostic, he certainly wasn't an atheist. He says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like religion and ethics, but let's say religion belongs to something that is in the realm almost of aesthetic experience. If there are any truths that belong to it, they can only be experienced, they can only be shown, they cannot be put in language. A technical word for this is that statements about the truth of religion are non-cognitive. In other words, they do not have propositions. They do not consist of propositions with cognitive contents. So in some sense, the truth is not such that it can be expressed in language. That's a very INFJ perspective, and that comes from an INFJ who was very mystical in temperament, did not necessarily associate with any particular religion, although he was interested very much in Kierkegaard, for example, who's one of the very first existentialists and a Christian existentialist, but very interested in this idea of the religious experience as an aesthetic experience of truth. And truth may be understood as aletheia in the Greek sense of it showing itself in an experience of transcendence, not in such a way that it can be expressed in language. And that's extremely different from the way in which the TI user approaches religion. TI user is all going to be about language, about finding reasons and using reason to vindicate religion. But in the case of the NI dominant, there's almost this sense of the hopelessness of this enterprise and the entirely abandoning oneself to the mystical experience of religion and finding the truth in that experience. And it doesn't really matter in the end if the words do not accompany the experience. In fact, the words tend to denature the experience by bringing it down to the down-to-earth quality of language and linguistic expression. And you see that obviously in Wittgenstein, you see that in Ibn al-Arabi, or Al-Farabi, I should say, sorry. Al-Farabi in, no, Ibn al-Arabi, I'm getting confused, but yeah, in Arabi in Islam. You see that in, you know, a lot of people who identify as INFJ and are religious. To them, there's not a whole lot of point engaging in endless philosophical disputations as to the nature of religion. It doesn't mean that they just say it's all a matter of emotion, or it's all a matter of cultural practice, or your heritage. It's something very profound to them, but it exists at this level that's mystical in the sense that it doesn't have the truth functionality of the statements that we would make about the physical world. And in some sense, if the predicate true applies to those experiences, it is not quite truth in the same sense. Instead of truth as something about the world that makes the sentences we say about the world true, it's more true as an experience or revelation, something that comes forward and reveals itself to us. Note that, you know, in the case of the FE dominance, if the NI accompanies it, there'll be a similarity, but more focus on the collective experience, whereas in the case of the INFJ, the focus on the collective experience of this and the shared experience exists, but is a little bit less pronounced. In the case of an FI dominance, the focus will be very much on the personal emotional experience. In the case of a T dominance, it'll often be the case of what's good about religion for the balance of society, for people having good values, for people having organized upbringings. They'll tend to see the social value of religion. That's how they will justify it. Belief comes along with it, but there's this strong sort of externalogical justification. So the INFJ and the INTJ, except that the INTJ, the experience will be more personal, the TFI, stands apart from the rest. And I would be really curious to hear if you're religious or not religious. Have you similar views? How do you see the topic of INFJs and religion? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget you can support me on Patreon. You can support me by purchasing my books. You obviously have the Infinite Castle that I presented, that I'm very eager to have as many people as possible read, and the Ecstatic Soul. And I will see you next Sunday, guys. And perhaps earlier, you never know. Ciao.